Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Sherman Reed. Today I'll be doing my 2021 reading stats. So this year I actually went and did a spreadsheet because I was super curious to see like how my reading is, like what kind of dramas I read mostly, the gender of the authors, like, you know, if they were owned. Like there were a lot of things I was curious about this year, so I decided to do a reading an actual spreadsheet for it, and today I'm going to go through some of them with you guys. And before I get started, I do have my Goodreads stats in here for my year in books, so it kind of gives me like some general stats in terms of like how many pages I read, my average rating, all that stuff. So I'm very curious to see what reading I did this past year. So for the year of 2021, I didn't read too many books. I only read 143, which is very low for me. I think previously, like, I've been continuously good about reading like at least 250 books and up, like 300. I think one year I even read like 350 books. Like, I read a lot of books. So 143 is actually a very low number. I didn't even make 150, but it's fine. Like, I feel like this year was just weird for me, just very busy. I had a lot of things going on, and so let's just have to go through the books. So I did read 143 books this past year, and the number of pages I read that was still pretty decent. I read 54,000 pages, 411, so not too bad. The shortest book that I read was actually Demon Slayer Volume 1. I guess the other volumes were longer, I'm not really sure. And then the longest book that I read was Queen of Air and Darkness by Cassandra Clare, and that is at 912 pages. Honestly, I am kind of disappointed that I didn't read any books over 1,000 pages this year. So I feel like that's something that's not like a big goal of mine, but I feel like usually I do have one book that's like 1,000 pages, but not this year, I guess. But I was close, though. 912 is not too bad. The average book length in 2021 was actually 380 pages. I'm going to go through a little bit more in detail about like the number of books, like pages I read later on, but this is like the average book length. The most popular book that I read this past year was actually Where the Crawdads Sing, and that one had over 2.6 million readers, or people who have shelved this book. So that's kind of insane. Like, that book was also really good. My least popular book was actually The Blue Witch by Elaine Adams. This book was only have like 2,276 people who shelved this book, so it is not very popular. It's the least popular book on here. My average rating for 2021 is actually 3.8 stars, which honestly is better. I feel like usually I'm in the 3.5 range, or like 3.4, 3.6, you know, around that range. So I'm getting close to 4.0, which is good, because that means that I'm reading better books. The highest rated on Goodreads for me was actually Demon Slayer Volume 8. So that one had like a 4.7 average rating, which is great. So those are all of my Goodreads stats with you guys. Moving on to the stats I did myself for my spreadsheet. So the first chart I have over here is actually my month in reading. So as you can see, August as well as December were my best months. I read 20 books in August and 18 books in December. I did not read very much in January or in October. Both months I read 6 books or 7 books, so it was not great. So it definitely fluctuates. I'm very curious to see like how my this year will be, because I feel like I would say averagely I was reading about 10 books a month, just because looking at February, March, June, July, August, September, and December, I feel like majority of the month I read over 10 books. But then I have a few months where I just read very little. And then this is where I kind of go into my books versus ratings. So as you can see here, that majority of my books was actually 4 stars. I had 42 books that were 4-star reads, and then I had 40 books that were 5 stars. So that's actually really good, which is kind of crazy actually, because, well, you know what it is? It's because my Demon Slayer, I gave all of them 5 stars, and there is what, like 23 volumes. So that means that only 17 books besides Demon Slayer were actually 5-star reads for me, but that's why the number is so high. And that also shows that I did not read a lot of bad books. I read only 1 book that was 1.5 stars, and I read 10 books that were 2 stars, and 3 books that were 2.5 stars. So honestly, like, in terms of quality of books, they're majority of them are over 3 stars, which is very good. Now looking at the form of reading that I did, whether it's physical, ebook, or audio, you can see here that most of the books that I read is physical. I read like almost 48% that were physical. I did read a good amount of audiobook, so yeah, like I feel like audio is just a very good way of reading for me, just because I can do a lot of things. I like drive and then I can listen to an audiobook when I'm running some chores, like doing chores and errands in the house. I can, you know, do that as well. Ebook was, I feel like I read a lot more ebooks in the beginning of the year, and then it kind of just like stopped, mainly because I was doing a lot of ebooks when I was doing my ARC reading vlogs, because that's where a lot of my ebooks come from. They're ARCs from NetGalley. But then I just got busy and I was trying to read most of my physically owned TBR, and so that number just, you know, went down to like 21%. So anyways, moving on to the genres, which I'm very curious about. So as you can see here, fantasy is by far my #1 genre. I have almost 56% is all fantasy, which is amazing. And then my smallest amount was nonfiction, because I read only one book there. But my second was actually contemporary, which is 14%. So I'm very surprised about that. Sci-fi was actually pretty low as well. I didn't read a lot of sci-fi this year. I did read quite a bit of romance in there as well. And honestly, a lot of these books are, I would say, like dual genres, because a lot of like contemporaries are contemporary romances. So some of these I feel like were contemporary but wasn't heavily on the romance, so I shelved it as contemporary. I shelved it as whatever I felt like was their primary genre, even though a lot of these were, definitely had two genres. I put mystery and thriller together because I feel like they're very similar, and that was another big one as well for me. But contemporary and fantasy are my #2 for sure. I'm also surprised about my historical, because I usually read a lot of history fiction, but I guess this year like not so much. All right, moving on to my pages read. So I only did it for three chunks this time. I did under 300 pages. I did one between 300 to 500 pages, and then I did one over 500 pages. I feel like I didn't really care too much in terms of the other numbers, but as you can see here, that most of my books are between 300 to 499, which is, you know, as expected, since I feel like most books are within that range. But I do hope to skew that number a little bit more towards the 500 plus page for this next year. So I did read a lot of books that were under 300 pages, but again, 23 of those were Demon Slayer. So anyways, moving on to my age range. So age range over here, I have young adult, middle grade, adult, and new adult. As you can see here, a majority of it is young adult. I read 92 books, which is 64% that were not young adult. I have adult fiction here, that was my second, which is 46. So honestly, like I read like basically half the books. For every 2 books of young adult, I read 1 adult book, which is as expected. I'm still very much a young adult reader, but I'm hoping that as this year I'll, you know, kind of like switch to more adult, I think. I mean, but then again, I see what I have on my shelves. I feel like most of my books on my shelves are young adults, so that's kind of like books I still gear towards too. Moving on to my author gender. Okay, this was also very curious to me as well, because I was kind of curious to see if they were like female or male or like non-binary. So as you can see here, most of my books I read were female. So they're like 68.5%. Very small portion is male, and actually about the same number of non-binary versus male authors for me, 15 and 16%. So that's kind of interesting for me. Just kind of got a little note. Then the next chart I have over here is my their person of color. So I have over here, it's a yes, which is 43.4%, and if they're no, which is they're not a person of color, which means they're white, it's 56.6%. So I do hope to have this number switch next year. I do want to read more books by people of color, just because I feel like I want to. So, and then the last chart I have over here is if they're owned, borrowed, or if they're an ARC. So the one thing I do want to mention is that the way how I calculated this was if I specifically borrowed from the library that I don't already have. So a lot of the books that I do listen to on audiobook, I actually already have the book, so I count it as owned, even though I was listening to an audiobook, which means I was technically borrowing it, but I own a copy. So that's kind of how I categorize it. So like pretty much all the audiobooks, or majority of the audiobooks I read or listened to, were owned, even though they were technically borrowed, if that makes any sense. Which is why my borrow is actually low, because if you count it as audiobooks that I bought from the library as borrowed, then that number will be a lot higher. But because most of the ones I was borrowing were ones I owned, I counted as under owned. So that's like the only thing here. So borrowed was ones I purely borrowed, I didn't own already, and then the arcs were the ones I was reading through NetGalley or if I owned a physical arc. So I didn't read a lot of those, to be honest, but that's fine. I feel like my main concern last year and this year really is to just try to read as many physically owned books that I have, because I have quite a few. I mean, when I was packing, I literally have like almost 40 boxes of books, and I would say that a good like majority, like 80% of them were books I did not read. So that says a lot. So definitely want to like spend this year just going through the books that I own but I have not read yet. So that's to say for this video, just a very like quick, just like some stats analysis of how my reading was this past year. Like I was just curious for myself and just like see where I stood in terms of like which books I read more, like genres, all that information. So let me know down below how your reading was this past year, and yeah, let's ultimately save this video. As always, if you like the video, please give me a thumbs up. Remember to subscribe on my channel. If you'd like to see more content of me, please don't forget to subscribe down below, as well as hit the notification bell. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.